Hello, everybody, and welcome to my review of the first chapter of The Great Gatsby. So, this book is tough. I wanted to give you a chapter by chapter breakdown like we do in class. So, I'm just going to go through my notes on what I think is important in the book, try to help you answer the questions as best we can. I'm sure the themes will come up. So, if you're really struggling with the book, this will really help clarify stuff for you. So, let us begin. It begins with our narrator, Nick. His name's Nick Calloway. And the very beginning of the book is very important. It shows Nick is rich, which is going to be a theme in this, wealth and money, but he has humility. His dad told him, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, just remember that all people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. And so he says, I'm inclined to reserve all judgment. So we see, like I said, Nick has humility. He's really going to be a fair and virtuous protagonist in a lot of senses. People also trust him. He says, I realized by some unmistakable sign that intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon for people. Again, he brings up reserving judgment as a matter of infinite hope. So when this novel starts off, we have to realize that Nick is very optimistic and very hopeful, much like America was at the start. He says there's a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. He does realize, though, that some people are horrible. He's not naive, okay? So he might be kind of innocent and optimistic, but he's not naive. And he brings up Gatsby right away. He says, Gatsby represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. So everything that he hates. And again, I told you that Gatsby can represent the American dream. So already he's setting up that some things, he's going to have a lot of critiques of what he sees and what's going on. He says Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations at men. So basically, Nick is going to tell you he's going to go from this hopeful, optimistic to become more jaded and cynical as the novel goes on. He sets that up right away. So watch for how Nick is offended, how Nick goes from this more optimistic view into this more modernistic view that people have of America that can be quite negative. He's rich. He's from old money, and we'll talk about old money and new money. He's originally from the West, and he's come out east. Let's see. He went to fight in the Great War, and he was, it says he was quite restless. And he went to go east and learn the bond business because he didn't get as much satisfaction as fighting in the war or serving than he thought. It takes place in 1922. So the war has just ended. Continuing, it says he's ambitious and optimistic. As I walked on, I was lonely no longer. I'm on page 8 now. I was a guide, a pathfinder, an original settler. He had casually conferred on me the freedom of the neighborhood. There's this whole stuff that comes up now about East Egg versus West Egg. And what that is really old money versus new money. We also learn it takes place on Long Island, New York. Now, these places aren't real, but it's fashioned after these two ideas that did come up. The old money is people who've had money basically forever, even before the country. They are more refined. They're considered more fashionable in the novel. They're often portrayed as more beautiful. They're really timeless. And then there's Nick and Gatsby and others who have what's called new money. So they made it, remember I said there was a big boom in America at the time? They made it recently. The people with old money look down on those with new money because they think they haven't earned it. They think America is theirs and these people are just a flash in the pan and stuff. And in many senses, they end up being right. But the people in West End tend to be sort of tacky. They spend their money sort of frivolously and a little bit, it's uglier and classless. So there's going to be this battle between those who've always had money and are more refined, and I think they're above everyone else, and those with new money like Gatsby or Nick who have just come into it. And you'll see some of the other characters in the novel from old money. We then meet Daisy, who's Nick's second cousin, and she married into Old Money. Her husband, Tom Buchanan, who I'm sure right away you notice is a real dirtbag, and he continues to be a dirtbag. He's going to be quite villainous throughout the story. It's her husband and a college friend. They live in East Egg, so they're from, like I said, the Old Money place. Well, Nick is from the New Money. Um, it goes on to describe Tom. He is very tough, but um, it brings up that he's sort of peaked young. And you see he's got this big chip on his shoulder, and that's because of that. We describe Tom's physicality a lot. A sturdy, straw-haired man of 30, hard mouth, arrogant eyes, always leaning aggressively forward. These aren't subtle details that this guy's sort of a jerk, and that's what is going to come up here. He had a cruel body. So this big bully, that's who Tom is. He had a gruff, husky tenor. Um, and he even says, one of the first things he says to Nick, now don't think my opinion of these matters is final, just because I'm stronger and more of a man than you are. Oh yeah, really subtle, Tom. Nice. So we move on. They're chatting. They're getting to know each other, and then we also meet Jordan Baker. She is also Old Money. Her face was set. Okay, this is then he goes on to he brings up Baker, um, and then he goes and looks and discusses his cousin. And his cousin Daisy is obviously going to be a main character. And this is one of his first descriptions of her. He says, her face was sad and lovely with bright things in it, bright eyes, and a bright, passionate mouth. So we see that Daisy is lovely and charming, but she comes off in the scene as a little bit vapid, sort of like not there and not there at the same time. Like she's just sort of floating along. So if you picked up on that, good job. I'm going to see that sort of continues. She has this spark and intensity to her that even her own cousin Nick sees and people are drawn to, yet kind of empty on the inside at the same time. We'll see what that's all about later. So they're talking, they're hanging out, they're having a few drinks. Basically, they drink through this whole novel. Okay, they're all sort of become either are alcoholics or become alcoholics. So you'll see that drinking just sort of adds to the corruption of the characters in general. The laziness continues. I'm stiff, she complained. I've been lying on that sofa for as long as I can remember. That's with Miss Baker. And then she said, Miss Baker has had 4 cocktails. She brings in 4 cocktails from the pantry, and the drinks keep flowing. And then he notices that Miss Jordan Baker, who we're going to see, I forget if she mentions it right here or a little later, was an ex golfing pro. And he describes her, and he describes her as quite attractive. And he's attracted to her right away. And she also comes up off as this a little bit vapid, sort of sarcastic person. So we're not getting the best impression of these people. Tom, Daisy, Jordan all have these sort of obvious flaws that Nick isn't pointing out directly, but he's dropping hints. And so pick up for how he adds to that later. Let's see. Miss Baker later yawns. She has impersonal eyes in the absence of all desire. Hint, hint, quite vapid, as I said, quite empty. And now Tom comments on what life is like at the time. And he says, civilization is going to pieces. And he might be right at that, as all the things we talked about very much look like the world was in shambles. However, what does Tom blame? He doesn't blame the wars, the way people are acting, the things I brought up in the lecture, over materialism, greed, etc., etc. He thinks it's because of the races are mixing more and more. And so he brings up this book, The Rise of the Colored Empires, and he says, I read deep books with long words in them. And he says, this fellow has worked out the whole thing. It's up to us who are the dominant race to watch out for the other races, or they will have control over things. So Tom is also a racist. That's awesome. So right away, Tom is painted as this terrible person. That's really not going to stop throughout. So if you got that impression, good on you, because it's going to continue. And then Daisy says of Nick, and this is really interesting. You see people like having Nick around, even though he doesn't say or do much. And here's the first sign of it. I love to see you at my table, Nick. You remind me of a rose, an absolute rose. And it's because you're going to see Nick has a purity to him that they lack. And then Tom and Daisy go off, and Tom talks to Jordan, and she gives a bit of gossip. Why, she said hesitantly, Tom has got some woman in New York, so it's known that Tom also cheats. more decline of values there. It shows how cynical she is on the next page. This first chapter is really setting up a lot of the characters and what Nick is in for here with meeting these people. She has a hearty skepticism. It explains that Tom and Daisy fight like crazy when it says there's a certain temperament the situation might have seemed intriguing. My own instinct was to telephone immediately for the police. Tom and Daisy get into it in the other room, and he hears it. So he's like, so he's just a whirlwind here. There's a lot more cynicalness and lack of values coming through, etc., etc. Talks about disillusionment comes up when I believe it is, I forget, Daisy says, everyone thinks so, the most advanced people, and I know. I've been everywhere and seen everything and done everything. Her eyes flashed around in a defiant way, rather like Tom's, and she laughed with thrilling scorn. Sophisticated. God, I'm so sophisticated. And then she goes on and is even more apathetic about things. Then we learn now that Jordan is a golf player and that she wants to set up Nick with Jordan because they could be a good pair. She has no family, again hinting at a lack of values. And in the end, Nick says, I was confused and a little disgusted as I drove away. And probably after this reading this chapter, you were too. Because it's sort of like, who are these people I'm meeting? None of them seem to be great people. And you were certainly right about that. They're not. And really watching their sort of downfall and all the terrible things they do, that's sort of at the core of the novel. Let's see. And then it ends on a very strange note. If you thought it wasn't weird enough, he mentioned Gatsby, but now we meet him for the first time. And Nick lives next door to Gatsby. And Gatsby has this huge mansion. Nick lives in a nice house too. But Gatsby has this huge new money mansion. And it says he was stretching out his arms towards the dark water in a curious way, standing at the edge of his dock. They live on the water in New York Harbor. And then it continues on page 26. And distinguish nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been at the end of a dock. So Gatsby is just reaching out at the end of his dock. It's middle of the night. And he's reaching out towards this green light, or it's the evening, so he can still see him. That's on the other end of the harbor. And remember, old money lives across the harbor, and he lives in new money. What the heck is this green light? What is he reaching for? Who is this dude? And what's going on? Why? He is the great Gatsby. And all these questions will be answered. I can tell you, too, that green light is going to be a very important symbol. So, like I said, in Chapter 1, we're mainly just meeting all these characters. And as I mentioned, if you get the hint, you're like, why is one worse than the next? You're not wrong. And that's going to kind of be the point and what we can sort of learn from them. But we have Nick to guide us, who does seem like a good person. It's all about sort of whether Nick can survive this. And he said it definitely did affect him, and we'll see how and why. And then it ends with Gatsby reaching out to that green light, and we are introduced to him. But, you know, it wouldn't be the great Gatsby if he just said, hey, what's up? I'm Gatsby. It's got to be something strange. And it's just sort of going to get a little weirder as it goes on. Okay, so that's Chapter 1 of The Great Gatsby. Go back through. I hope that can help you answer some of your questions. If you're still having any problems, you can email me. Next week, we will move on and do Chapter 2. Okay, have a good one, guys. Stay healthy, stay safe.